Good morning and welcome to One Vision podcast. You're live on YouTube and also you'll be live on Spotify channel. We are delighted to join with our special guest today, and we are very privileged to have Matt Nicholls. He is the Assistant Chief Constable for Hertfordshire, and also Chris Cook is a racial equality group supporting with the Hertfordshire Police support. And we are delighted to welcome both of them to One Vision podcast. Thank you for coming. And I also join with Michael. Michael will be leading us today in this podcast program.
Excellent. Welcome, gentlemen. Matt,
Thank you.
Good to have you with us. Chris as well. There are many topics that we could and maybe should address, from stop and search to knife crime, county lines, recruitment, community relations, and much more. We could probably be here until midnight, but we won't. Matt, I understand that you're on duty today.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm the senior officer on call for the weekend for the whole of the Hertfordshire County. So if my phone does go off, I'm just going to be leaving you with Chris.
Let's hope there aren't any emergencies, to say the least. May I ask you both to share a little information about yourself, maybe introduce yourselves, what you do on a daily basis, but maybe then we could do a quick fire question and answer. Pardon the pun. We could do a quick fire round. But over to you first, just if you'd be kind to introduce.
Well, I'm going to go to my learned friend Chris, who works tirelessly as a volunteer for us within the constabulary. So I'd like Chris to introduce himself first.
Okay, why not? Chris Cook, resident of Potters Bar, not too far away from Watford. I have some connections with Watford. I did have a season ticket here for a while in the days of Luther Blissett, John Barnes, Nigel Callaghan, all those good people. But my real connections lie with Chelsea. Who are the women are playing in the Conti Cup final this afternoon against Man City, not too far away from here at Wimbledon. Also played cricket at Watford Town for a few years in the days of Mark Eilert.
That's all.
Turned up. I then went on and matchday qualified umpire, level 2 umpire. But my passion, as far as leisure time goes, is for sailing. I have a yacht down at Eastbourne, so I get out on the water as much as possible.
Well, we know where we're going in the summer.
If only we could go across to France. In the old days, it was really easy. But I do run Potters Bar Radio, which is an internet radio station based in Potters Bar, set up just before or around the time COVID started to hit, with the idea of being able to supply accurate information to local residents. Although that being said, we are actually worldwide because we're on the internet. A lot of good people working on the station over there. So we take some syndicated programs, but we also create our own as well.
So it's talk back?
It's music, talking. We covered the Remembrance Day service at the War Memorial in Potters Bar back in November. We've done some other outside broadcasts and the like, and just done some interviewing. During Storm Eunice, I did a 5-hour solid programme updating what was happening locally and what was happening nationally as well. But we'll discuss all sorts of things. I do a lot of Facebook work as well with the community. So that's probably enough about me.
I think you should take charge of today's discussion. Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome. Matt.
Thanks. Matt Nicholls, Enoch introduced me. I'm Assistant Chief Constable in Hertfordshire. I started my police career in 1992, so this year I'll have 30 years police service. I started working in London in the Metropolitan Police, and I've spoken to Enoch in the past about this. My first posting actually was in Southall in West London before I moved to Notting Hill and then Colindale, and then came to Watford, where I spent a lot of my subsequent career at Watford. But it was at that early stage in my policing career that I was already policing diverse communities, particularly the Sikh community in Southall, and also a large Somalian community that was there as well. But I only have a plan to do a couple of years in the police. So something obviously went wrong. My late stepfather was a police officer for nearly 32 years in the Metropolitan Police in traffic, and my stepbrother was also a police officer at the time that I was finishing university. And I thought I'll do 2 years, get some experience of managing conflict and problem solving, and I was going to have a career in retail and marketing, but something didn't quite pan out, and so fast forward 30 years, and that's where I find myself here talking to you guys.
Just on that topic, what has kept you in the police force all these years? Unfinished work.
Yeah, well, in any business, I think there's always unfinished business, isn't there? And for me, and it might sound a bit cliche to your viewers, but it is a passion for public service, for looking out for the vulnerable, for doing the right thing, and just generally trying to make the country, or in this case, the county, a slightly better place to live, work, and visit. So I know that might sound a bit cliche, but a lot of people that end up in the public sector are very much driven by those kind of core values.
Yeah. And you, Chris, you've not only set up the radio station, but you do a lot of volunteer work. What drives you?
I feel very privileged to be part of the police family, because I do recognise it's a thin blue line. It's what stands between us and anarchy, and it comes down to it. And if we don't have a good, well-functioning police force, then we're in serious trouble. So I think the work Matt does, and his colleagues as well, I like to see it as an inverted pyramid, if you think in quality management terms, is that the support has to go to the frontline officers. So whatever we can do to help support the frontline officers, for whatever ethnicity they may be, then that will help. It's a privileged position being a volunteer, because I'm not subject to the same rules. I don't have to call Matt sir. I think the only person I ever call sir is Charlie Hall when I meet him occasionally. That's out of respect. So yes, there isn't that. We're not bound within the structure, so we can talk about things that we feel are important, or that the community are feeding back to us, because we're all still part of the community, and look at all aspects of policing. And if we find something that is wrong, to act as a critical friend, raise it. The police know that we're not being belligerent, not being difficult, we're not trying to prove a point or anything like that. We're coming to it as independent people with hopefully some expertise in that line. So I think it's a very privileged position. I just wish more members of the community would take an interest in policing and really understand what's going on out there and what officers are facing, even if it's just going to the force communications room for a visit, understanding the resource issues, understanding you cannot be at 5 incidents if you've only got four units, this sort of thing. And I think the more we can try and educate the public about policing, then the better.
So is there a visit day that is there such a...
Okay, well, you're reading my mind. No worry. We perhaps should have you as an interviewer for suspect interviews. But so when Chris was just talking there and about volunteers and the community, and we are an open and transparent organisation, and we want to reach out to the community. Obviously, COVID. Sorry, that's the first time COVID's been mentioned. Has been a challenge in terms of what we do to try and bring people into the organisation to see our working. So Chris touched on the force control room, so a huge control room at our police headquarters in Welwyn Garden City. And often we've taken groups of people into that room to see how we operate and function. But of course, during COVID, we weren't able to do that. We're starting to open up the police estate a bit more now. But one of the big things that we do is we have what we call a ride-along scheme. And that's, and I've said this particularly to the Watford Afro-Caribbean Association, which I've done a number of evenings with, and other community groups, where if you want to come and see what we do, come along on a Friday night. We'll give you a reflective jacket that says Police Observer, and you can come and see some of the challenges that officers face every day. Whilst I've just got the microphone, as it were, we are also in the process of setting up what's a really exciting week-long work experience program, which we hope to run for the first time this year, where we'll have approximately, I think, 16 students. Now, some of those will come from our police cadet pool, but also we're going to be looking to schools to identify individuals to come along and do a week-long work experience program. And we've not been very good at that in the past, and that's probably the same with a number of organisations. You know, you get maybe a 16 or a 17-year-old in, and you come in and you sort of say, "I'll go and spend a bit of time with that person and go and make everyone a cup of tea and do a bit of photocopying." Still exists to a certain degree, but actually we've got a really good story to tell around the exciting opportunities that is a police career, and we're going to really focus in on that. So watch this space, because later this year we hope to run our first pilot of about 16 individuals. So again, a real opportunity for individuals that are thinking about policing as a career to really step into that space.
Brilliant. And thank you for that. Obviously, we're going to, during the conversation, come to recruitment and come to community touch points and community cohesion, and we'll discuss that in a little more detail shortly. But let me take a step back. As I said earlier, let's just do the quick fire before we dig a little deeper.
Is it fingers on the button?
Okay, good. Right, making it.
Chris, where did you grow up? Potter's Bar. Where did you go to school?
In Potter's Bar.
Potter's Bar. What are your interests other than sailing?
Okay, I run the local chess club, who are currently Hertfordshire champions. A very small club, grew out of working with juniors at the Hearts level. I was coaching them along with other people. My daughter, at age 9, took up chess properly and played for England girls at under 11, one of 6. So the club was sort of built around her in many ways. I mean, she hardly plays now. But yeah, very, very successful club. Unfortunately, the junior side dropped off with electronic games. They all prefer sitting there and that's rather moving wooden pieces about the board. So yeah, passion for chess, passion for photography. I belong to the filmmakers. I play tennis when my body allows me to do so, and run, and very involved with the local church, the local parish church as well.
You, I think, mentioned the football club you used to support, and
I had some friends who were councillors in Bushy.
Nice.
And got invited along to watch Watford play. So I did get a season ticket, went to the cup final that year when they lost 2-0 to Everton. Slightly dodgy. But it was
Before VAR, was it?
Yeah, before VAR. There was another penalty that Liverpool got in a quarter final, I seem to remember, at Vicarage Road, which was very debatable. That's another matter. I think Watford were winning 1-0 at the time. No, a really exciting team at Watford, superb. But when it came to playing Chelsea, my heart was still with the Blues as opposed to. But naturally, I look out for Watford's results and wish them very well.
Don't we all? What is your favourite food?
I have very simple tastes, as my family despair of, where they want to put spices on things, and I hate cheese. It's like it wants clear cheese. No, just normal sort of spaghetti bolognese, fish and chips, steak kidney pie, that sort of thing. Simple.
All delicious, to say the least. My family seems to think that I have a specialty when it comes to food, and that is I just love food. There isn't a particular dish. You mentioned you go to church, or you're a man of faith. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I consider myself practicing Christian. So yes, very involved with the parish church of St Mary, the Virgin and All Saints in Potter's Bar. We have a superb priest up there, Father Stephan, who preaches the most amazing sermons. Please do call him a friend. Yes, I was there on Ash Wednesday for the imposition of ashes, and usually tune in for the morning and evening prayer. And we try to broadcast the services on the radio on Sunday morning, so it's a bit of a toss-up whether I go to the service in person or I end up putting it out on air, but it works on both ways.
And finally, quick fire. What attracted you to volunteer for the police force?
This is going to be interesting.
When I was a teenager, I did consider joining the police. However, my short-term memory was such that I would have been useless in the witness stand because something like that was roughly something happened. But I've always had a keen interest in the law, in how that works. In later times, been very interested in crime prevention, neighbourhood watch, that sort of thing, and how the judiciary works. Trying to dispel some of the myths around policing. For example, prosecutions come from the CPS. It's not down to the police nowadays. And in fact, I was talking to an officer the other day, I don't really know, we had some scaffolding come down in Potters Bar, which blocked the road.
Right.
And the police were charged with a car at either end to stop anybody from going in front of the scaffolding. So the high street was closed. So I took the opportunity to go and have a chat with a couple of the officers up there, which was really interesting, and found some shared views. I've been privileged. I've been on the ride along, been to custody centre. That is not a place you want to go to unless it is a visitor. I also did some of the personal self-defence training as well. Did 3.5 days of that, which again gave me a real insight into what the police face. And although we weren't allowed to charge, and he went and did the taser training at Alconbury as well. When I found it,
well done for finding it.
it was a nightmare. So I have an interest, but also from the other side, from public point of view. But yes, I think the more we can, going back to my previous point, educate the public about policing and what police officers face, and the fact they don't have superpowers, and they may not be able to solve that burglary or that van break-in, particularly if there isn't the evidence to work on. They cannot just use forensics at whatever it costs nowadays, willy-nilly. So there has to be good evidence, but we have to work ourselves to protect, take the wheelie bins out, don't give access to the rear of the property. But we also need to understand what drives criminality as well. And there's some very good material out there that suggest people go and read to understand how the justice system works and what fuels criminality. And some of the criminology degree will be able to explain it far more than me. But I don't believe people are born as criminals, even though some people might think that's the case. So there is the nurture side of things, the opportunity side of things, the peer pressures, particularly in areas such as Peckham. Some very good work by James O'Brien, the LBC guy, who's looked at the whole issue of white privilege and how people are negatively affected because they don't have that same opportunity which we assume. And if a kid gets a choice of carrying out that courier job for the drug running gang or getting beaten up or whatever, it's often not a difficult decision.
Thank you for that. You've encouraged, and I hope you'll encourage others to get involved, like yourself, to say the least. Matt.
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Surrey.
Where did you go to school?
In Surrey.
What are your interests?
So my interests, you're probably going to come on to football, so maybe I'll cover that one off first. So I used to go and watch Wimbledon play at Plough Lane. So the mighty Dons.
The old days.
The old days. But of course, sadly, they don't exist in their original format. Although there is AFC Wimbledon now, back playing just outside of Kingston, and of course you've got MK Dons. But I don't really have a team. It's going to be a bit controversial, so I kind of follow Tottenham a bit now, just because my daughter, who plays in a number of girls' football teams, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for her today because she's actually she's doing some regional trials with the England Women's Pathways today. So proud father moment. But she decided she was going to support Tottenham, so I kind of just. Well, it's not really by choice, actually, because she tells me everything that's going on, and her encyclopedic knowledge of football is amazing. So something that I probably had when I was that age. So that's the football bit out of the way. In terms of in terms of interests, I do a lot of sport. I used to run a lot of half marathons, but my knees and back was starting to tell me to slow down on that. But I've not really listened because I play competitive squash. and my other passion is that I coach what is now an under-13 girls football team, but I've been doing that for about 3 years, which my daughter plays in that particular team as well. So that's my kind of passion outside of work.
A fit man. You've got me to share.
Well, it is fit, but that's partly linked to if you're going to ask me what my favourite food.
Yes.
I do. If I had to choose, it would be Italian, and I also have a bit of a penchant for wine.
Red or white?
Both. And if it's fizzy as well, that's fine.
Bubbly. Are you a man of faith?
Yeah, so we've spoken about this before, haven't we? And I am. I don't go to church as much as I probably should, but that's partly linked to all the other challenges I have with a relatively busy life and work. You know, I'm here working this weekend, so I wouldn't be able to go to church, but I go to my to a parish church, St Michael's in Bray, and like Chris was saying about being pleased to call his local vicar a friend. My local vicar, Reverend Ainsley Swift, is somebody that I call a friend, and we'll go for a beer occasionally, or we'll go for a coffee, and we'll just chat about stuff. And it's actually interesting when you talk to in my case vicars, some of the challenges that they see and face, and sometimes not too dissimilar actually to what we face in policing in terms of challenging situations and helping people and people in crises.
What did we cover? What attracted you to the police?
Well,
and maintaining.
It was more, as I say, it was more. I think at the time it was very much my family were involved in policing, and I felt that I wanted to do something, and then clearly that passion of public service then continued, because I spoke about moving into marketing and retailing, but that's hospitality. It's kind of customer focused, and there is something enjoyable about giving a service, and hopefully a good service, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as the chat develops.
Well, thank you both for that. That was supposed to be the quick fire round. It seemed to be slightly, but that was my fault. I shouldn't have had so many questions.
That's feedback, Chris. we must respond to it.
Somebody said to me, once the DJ starts talking, they're going to broadcast mode, and that's it.
Many of us are armchair experts in one thing or another. So let me ask you, what is the force doing well, and where do you think it can improve? Basically, to rate your performance.
Perhaps I'll start with this one, and then Chris can comment on what he's looking at.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think first of all, it's fair to say that Hertfordshire as a county is one of the safest counties in the country, and that it's not just me saying that; it's the statistics and what our surveys tell us. We've been blessed in the last couple of years with some healthier budgets than we previously had. So the years of austerity following the financial crisis hit not just Hertfordshire Constabulary hard, but policing and other public sector. And the wider community quite hard. But then with the government uplift programme, which is looking to replace many of those lost officers, and in certain circumstances increase it slightly, we've seen in Hertfordshire we've now got more officers than we've ever had in our history. So we've got just over 2,250 officers now. So what that allows us to do is to be more visible, and that's what our communities tell us. But that's a bit of a challenge at the moment because we've been recruiting so hard and so fast, as have other forces. We've got a lot of inexperienced officers at the moment, and so our big challenge is to bring them up to speed, develop them, and some of that is also, working with partner agencies, charities, so that our officers can be more informed. In terms of crime generally, and I'm conscious that crime and statistics, people look at them in different ways, but broadly what we have seen over the last couple of years, and it's partly linked to the pandemic, is that traditional acquisitive type crimes, so shoplifting, theft from motor vehicle, dwelling burglaries, residential burglaries, those kind of crimes have reduced quite substantially. So fun fact time, generally in a 24-hour period, there's less than 10 burglaries in the county of Hertfordshire, which, so in single figures. Now, of course, any crime is a crime too many, but just to put that into context in terms of where we are with our numbers of burglaries of properties, and of course, every one of those crimes has a victim attached to it. Where we're seeing some increases, and maybe we can talk about this later, is in the area of our safeguarding command, so looking after people. So domestic abuse has seen an increase, sadly. Some sexual offences have seen increases. Stalking and harassment has seen increases as well. Antisocial behaviour, which again can blight communities, has stayed broadly static. We compare ourselves as a force to other similar type forces, because of course different forces are of different sizes. So obviously we border the Metropolitan Police. They've got nearly 30,000 officers, biggest force in the country. Whereas somewhere like Wiltshire or Warwickshire or Bedfordshire, they've only got between 1,000 to 1,300 officers. So what we try and do is compare ourselves to similar forces. So Surrey would be a similar force to ours, Leicestershire, those kind of forces. And we can compare ourselves in terms of how well or not we're doing in all of those different crime types and many more. And generally, we are performing well in most of those areas. But there are some challenges, and what I would say before I hand over to Chris is one of our biggest challenges, and we spoke about it briefly before we came into this conversation, is the fundamental principles of policing in this country are linked to Sir Robert Peel and what he said about the Peelian principles, about the public are the police and the police are the public, and the measure of an effective police force is the absence of crime, but also very much about trust and confidence in policing to build social cohesion, and that's been really rattled recently with some high-profile, terrible cases which police officers have perpetrated, and that means that we've got to redouble our efforts to re-engage with the community and to rebuild that trust and confidence, because without the trust and confidence, people don't tell us what's going on, and if they don't tell us what's going on, we can't then map where the problems are, and then we can't use our resources to go there. So trust and confidence is a big issue for us.
Thank you. Chris?
It's a huge topic, but I'll echo what Matt says, is that the police cannot operate in a vacuum. The police have to work with the community of all sorts. Some people seem to have it in for the police, and I think this is something that needs to be challenged and sorted out. The police are doing their job. Noticed the other day there was a post on Facebook in South Bim saying there's a speed camera out, just to warn you guys, and you think, hang on a minute, is there a problem with speeding? That's why it's there. If you're going to tell people that camera is there, you're defeating the whole object. And you get these comments, stupid comments along things like, oh, well, yes, of course, I've only put a speed trap up because they're short of cash for the Christmas party or something like that. So there's an education side. I think the thing for me that hit home was 3 or 4 years ago, we had a spate of burglaries in Potters Bar, various other incidents around vehicle crime, and a public meeting was called by the then Chief Inspector, Steve O'Keefe, again, is a friend. And it wasn't so much what he said about the burglaries, that side of the work, but it's the other side, the nasty side of police and the sexual side of things, the people trafficking, terrorism, things that people just are not aware of. They do not know what is happening really in police, and they only see it as coppers riding around on bikes, having a cup of coffee and things, and times I've had arguments with people over that one. They don't understand what happens on a shift, and that's why you talked about the ride along. And I think that's a invaluable part, getting people out there, understanding that you might put the blues and twos on. We call them those still. Doesn't mean the car in front's going to get out of the way, even though you're trying to get to a case. Interfacing with the public, and said earlier, understanding what drives criminality. It's there's something behind it. Invariably, it's not a simple case. Often drugs. That's an area that needs to be looked at very carefully. But it's got to be that partnership. Thin blue line. Got to work on that and work with the police and help them not keep criticising them, because the police get far more criticism than the fire brigade wouldn't get and the ambulance service wouldn't go, but for some reason, because you're a copper, it seems to be open season, and I despair of that.
I'm just listening to volunteering police, and you talked about young people. Our One Vision, one of our aim and focus is on young people, giving them a voice. We're working closely with Parliament and working with Department of Work and Pension, to the school leavers and low-grade young people to come and volunteer, because during the COVID and also post-COVID, we're trying to encourage the young people to come and volunteer. One of the things I listen time and time and again with young people is volunteering. They're thinking, is a community service a punishment? I stopped and I was shocked to hear that, on one side I want them to come and, they want to put them back into work or, certain things. So I'm thinking of putting them in our group and listen to them, or even make a young person as a trustee, or work closely with our team, and that's why we created Watford Youth Council. So under policing, do you listen to young people?
Well, great question, and I'm sort of sat here shocked that people would think of volunteering as almost a punishment, because actually, first of all, I think this country would probably grind to a halt without the level of volunteering that takes place, and just in policing, special constables, that are warranted officers that have day jobs, paid day jobs, and come along and give their hours for free. And we've got lots of different policing volunteers, but whether it's helping with the local church, being a football coach, any kind of sporting coach, and actually what I would say to young people there is it allows you to develop and grow as a person by volunteering, because there is something nice about giving back to communities. It's like life, isn't it? The more you put in, the more you get out. In terms of what we do working with young people, there's a couple of things here. So first of all, we have a schools and gangs team, and they work tirelessly. You would have heard about Lives Not Knives campaign. So they work with schools, and particularly younger people that may be on the cusp of criminality or getting involved with the wrong peer groups. I've just had approved a business case to put another 20 police and community support officers into our schools, into our youth and schools engagement program, and I've been working with head teachers to bring about that investment. We used to have a lot of schools, PCSOs, in schools pre-2009, working with Hertfordshire County Council, but the austerity measures that I talked about, we withdrew from that, and we've now got, I think, a generation of individuals that perhaps haven't had that opportunity to see what I call capable guardians, role models, police officers, PCSOs, in just talking, being part, showing their human side. And I think that's what you're already trying to tease out of us today, you guys, is by saying, actually, the people here, they are human. We also very much support the Prince's Trust, and I've been working with the Prince's Trust for a number of years. So I allow officers and police staff to be seconded to the Prince's Trust, normally to what they call their team program. It's a 12-week long program, normally for people between the ages of, I think, 16 and 24, not in education, employment or training. to allow them to get life skills to make their lives hopefully more better. So they're just some of the things we do. But of course, equally, we've committed as the constabulary. We have 10 districts across the county which match the boroughs, and Chris touched on it a little bit earlier. But each of those has a safer neighbourhood team made up of police officers and police and community support officers, and they will be reaching out into youth programs as well. And we have some engagement with the Hearts FA, Stevenage Football Club Foundation, and the charitable foundation at Watford Football, because football brings together so many people. It's what we spoke about earlier. So we are doing a lot. And the other thing, Enoch, just before I maybe hand over to Chris, is I'm also thinking, because at the moment quite a lot of our new recruits are quite young. And I've often reflected and thought, God, these are young people coming into a really challenging career, in terms of what they may be faced with day to day. And how on earth are they going to be equipped? Well, of course, we do train them, but some of that experience just comes with age and life and experiences. But for me, actually, one of the things that we can do with some of these younger officers is link them into young people, because they've been a young person not that long ago. It's a long time since I've been a young person, but I remember when I was in the Metropolitan Police in the 90s, I was I was the only police officer that ran the Youth and Police Consultative Group in London Borough of Ealing. It was an offshoot of the main police consultative group. And one of my main qualifications for that at the time was because I was relatively young and I could perhaps link back into young people. And again, it's cliched, but children are our future, aren't they? Yeah, so what I'd say is we're doing a number of things, but there's always more to do. And of course, a shout out for our, we do a mini police program. So that's engaging primary school kids to understand a bit more about policing. And of course, we've got our police cadets program, and all those cadet programs are run by volunteers, often police officers, cops that are doing it in their spare time.
So how can we? Because the reason why I'm asking this question is, we had Princess Trust for the last 4 weeks. And 2 weeks they transformed this place. They painted. And,
they did it.
Yeah.
They did that.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Yeah. So they, we work with the fire services. And,
Yes.
Community support group. This is the first time I'm hearing that you support the Princess Trust and working with all these young people. So, as One Vision, how can we make it the general public, the school children or the young people know that police are doing all this? We're quite happy to work on that.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is one of many.
Yes.
I mean, yes, we have a much better footprint now on social media. But it is just about getting the message out there, and sometimes in policing we talk about hard to reach communities, and if something's hard to reach, whatever it is in life, you've got to work hard to get there, haven't you? So these are some of the things that we're doing, and whoever can help us on that journey, because I think Chris said we can't work in a vacuum, and we need people to help and support us, and so. That's what we're trying to do. We're reaching out. But yes, we have a number of officers and police staff that have also, after those 12-week programs where we've released them to go on to do those, have actually become young people mentors as well, as hopefully good, solid role models in the community to help individuals that maybe are struggling on their initial journey in life.
We're obviously going to come to the question of diversity, not only in the police force, but in the community and inclusion, including the young people. But before we do that, may I ask, what keeps you up at night? What issues are of most concern to you? And you may have sort of touched on that a little bit, but are there one or two things that keep you
maybe I'll start, and of course it is a nice conversation and in certain parts quite light-hearted. So when you first said what keeps me up at night, I was going to say my wife's snoring, but if she ever gets to see this, that there will be a certain amount to pay. But on a serious note, what keeps me up at night in terms of policing, and I touched on it earlier, and Chris mentioned it a little bit. It's the safeguarding issues. It's those young people that are being criminally exploited or sexually exploited. It's those hidden crimes, and Chris touched on some of them. Modern day human trafficking, human slavery. It must shock the public of the United Kingdom. One of the richest countries in the world. I think we're 5th or 6th in terms of wealthiness through GDP, and we see cases where people keep people in terrible working conditions. But these are often hidden. So for me, it's very much around exploitation of the most vulnerable, but often that is children. But we see it sometimes with adults, for example, maybe adults with complex needs, maybe drug and alcohol abuse, or maybe mental health, where we see that their properties being taken over. Cuckooing is something that people will be familiar with. So for me, it's those individuals, the most vulnerable in society, that keeps me awake at night.
Chris?
Not sure many things keep me awake at night, particularly because I don't. Well, no, not necessarily. But I don't have the same responsibilities that Matt has. So I'll turn it around a little bit and say what I think would help people to understand what's going on. I've just pulled up my Kindle library to suggest some books that I found particularly interesting to read and illuminating. Chris Dork, you see, Justice on Trial. That gets into the whole issue of drugs and how we handle drugs in this country. The US and UK has a different approach to Europe. Europe seems to have a far more enlightened approach as to how to deal with particular issues like heroin addiction, because that often drives a good deal of criminality. I'm sure Matt would agree with that. So I'd recommend that. Secret Barrister and Secret Magistrates, those two books I found very interesting, very illuminating. Leroy Logan, My Life as a Cop, very good book. He pops up on TV from time to time. I found that very inspirational. And also Michael Fuller's book, which has been renamed. It used to be called Kill the Black One First, and it was talking about when he was outside a place like Stamford Bridge. Right. He would be targeted because he was a black officer. But I think looking at how someone can rise to the top, become Chief Constable of Kent, his experience with Operation Trident, all the issues which are coming around again and again, I found that fascinating. But I skipped the first 50 pages, perhaps does talk about quite a lot about his upbringing. But once it gets into the heart of the matter about policing, I found that to be fascinating. So I would say to people, read, go and understand. Austerity definitely cost us a great deal. It's put us back as a community, policing as well. Volunteering, there's a reluctance to volunteer nowadays. I think with older people, it's a matter of time. They're so busy. By the time they get home from work, they want to kick off their shoes, sit down, watch some TV or so. But it comes from parents, because if the parents see the importance of volunteering and getting involved, joining the cadets and the like, then it will come from there. But on the other side, the parents are negative impressions, and of course they won't encourage them to go down that. So independence of thought by youngsters, but getting the opportunities to find out what it's really like out there, definitely. And supporting the younger officers. We had discussion at the National DEI meeting the other day, and the Criminal Justice Board as well. And the pressures, the experiences that young officers will come across, dealing with dead bodies.
Yes, yeah.
It's become more frequent than it was in the old days. And unless they've got the older officers to help talk them through it, psychotherapists, all this sort of thing, faith as well, to understand what's going on, it's going to be tough, which again is good to understand why officers are leaving the police force. But ideally, stop before we get to that stage. Identify an officer who is at risk or thinking about leaving, and trying to get involved and find out how we can help. We as a volunteer side as well.
we're touching on issues of county lines and
Yeah.
stop and search, which we'll get to in a moment. But I did say we were going to touch on diversity. Is the Hertfordshire Constabulary a diverse police force? And how diverse is it? Because we're obviously living in a very diverse community, and there is that feeling that we should have a diverse police force who will understand its community a little better.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And I don't know whether your viewers can see, I have got a laptop open because I have got a few stats that I wanted to make sure that I got right. But the broader point touches to me as an individual, because for many years, so it's interesting when you talked about diversity earlier, and of course I'm sat here as a middle-aged heterosexual white male who has a Christian faith, right? So perhaps I'm not particularly diverse when you look at the wider community of the United Kingdom. But for about 7 years, I was the diversity lead and ally for our LGBT staff and community. So I would go out and look to talk to those communities and make sure that their voice was being heard. And how it was described to me by a gay officer was sometimes it's better for straight people to bang on about gay issues than it is for gay people to bang on about gay issues. Now, I'm kind of quoting directly there, and I became absolutely passionate about that, and I looked at it through a different lens, and I'd tell a very quick story, if I may, before I move on to some wider diversity. Is every year I would have the privilege of being invited along to the national LGBT police conference, and as you can see here, I wear the rainbow badge, and it was in Manchester, and I'd stayed in Manchester the night before. And I was in a suit, and I put my badge on my lapel, so I wasn't in uniform, and I was walking to the venue, and I was walking down a side street. I wasn't particularly familiar with Manchester, but I knew where I needed to get to, and I could see three guys walking towards me that were kind of almost jostling each other and being quite rowdy, and I was thinking, right, wait a minute, are they looking at me because I'm wearing that badge? And it gave me a moment to try and walk in somebody else's shoes for a moment about how people can feel as a minority group. So I became very passionate about LGBT issues in particular, but then wider diversity matters now as the Chief Officer Lead for Hertfordshire. For all diversity. That's why I work so closely with Chris. And in particular, we're working on our visible diversity at the moment, because whether kind of people like that or not, that's a sort of starting point, because if you see something is visibly different, that helps you on that journey. So, but you've got to take your organisation with you as well, and this is some of the stuff that Chris is helping us with. But I've tried to say, look, because when I was doing all the work with the LGBT community, they would say, do you know what? There's a hierarchy here, and everyone's always talking about Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities and gender, women, and then it's us, right? So I get the tensions. But the reality is, at the moment, we have a particular challenge with our confidence from our Black communities, slightly less from other minority ethnic backgrounds, but Black, Afro-Caribbean in particular, the studies show that there is less trust and confidence in policing. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind that, and we probably don't have time to go into all of those. But so we've been on a journey, so I'll just give you a few stats, but as of 28th of February this year, we've got 2,259 police officers, of which 799 are female, so that's nearly 36%. And The national average is about, I think, about 32%. So in terms of female representation, so we're on that increasing journey, which is great to see. And 127, 5.6% come from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic community. Now that compares to in 2019, we had 99 Black, Asian and minority ethnic police officers, or 4.8%. So we are moving in the right direction, but I think the last time I looked at the statistics for Hertfordshire, I think about 12% of the population, and you guys probably know better than me, 12% of the population defines itself as either Black, Asian or minority ethnic. So we've got a long way to go. And the reason why this is important, but it's not the end goal. It's not the end goal for me to have 51% female and 49% male, because I think that's broadly the makeup of the country, and 12% Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. It's a starting point, but it's about, are we representing, not just in terms of what we look like, but are we listening, representing communities properly and responding to what they're asking us to do.
More importantly, obviously.
Yeah, completely. So we're on that journey, and that's where I'd quite like to hand over to Chris, because he's been really pushing us as a critical friend around some of this journey, because one of the challenges I've had is, when you are focusing particularly on one area of business, particularly Black, Asian, minority ethnic recruitment, retention, progression, when the majority see that can, you've got to negotiate through that, and that's what I love about One Vision, about the multicultural nature and there being something for everyone. So I'm reaching out, being honest with you where we are. We're on that journey. But for your viewers and listeners, it's been an absolute passion and commitment of mine, because I've seen, working in London, when I read the Macpherson report, not all of it, but the executive summary all those years ago, realising some of those issues that we were doing. I remember speaking to officers at the time, and people say, well, we treat everyone the same. How can we be? And that was the point. That was for me a watershed moment. Treating people fairly doesn't mean treating people the same, because of many injustices and many things that have gone wrong in the past. And so we need to work on that. So I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, Chris.
How
do you observe?
Well, I was going to pick up the point you made about understanding the different communities. You don't need to be a member of that community to be able to understand it. I mean, we have 3 white guys on the panel: myself, a retired QC, barrister, court judge, High Court judge, and Chief Magistrate. Male, pale and stale. They're older than me.
I sometimes just challenge that, just because I think sometimes it is easy to say, isn't it? But sometimes I think that does frustrate a large number of people, because whilst I may be male and pale, I wouldn't necessarily. I would say I was stale. No. I think a lot. So I mix it up a bit. Make Chris feel a bit uncomfortable now.
So we're talking about optics on the one hand,
exactly,
and about something a little more substantial.
Yes, but in fact, we can understand in this exactly the same way as Matt was saying just now about the gay community, LGBT plus Q. I've just come off Living in Love and Faith course, 5-week course every evening with the church. We had a chap called Will who came and ran it. Very intense, but we looked at all aspects of sexuality and the like. Fascinating. We had interviews with officers who have been through the promotion process, which was from constable to sergeant up, and every single officer that we spoke to was very, very open. They welcomed the opportunity to talk. Like me, sometimes we had to an hour's interview turned into 2 hours. That was fine, and we did about 30 seconds of the talking. And we've also been talking to the groups as well. In fact, one the leader says described us as 3 wise men. They were quite impressed. starting from a position of actually being quite defensive, when we explained our commitment, our absolute disdain, hate for racism and wish for equality, it opened it up really nicely. We started off from a defensive position to a very enthusiastic position as we came through. So we got that trust. So it's not a bar to understanding. If you have the commitment and the understanding and the will to change things, then that can arise. Numbers mislead, let's be fair about it. Having a 50-50 split does not necessarily make an organisation better than it was before, because it's still quality coming through, and it will take time for that quality to come through. The important thing is to ensure that there are no barriers in place that aren't intended to be there. You know, we talk about institutional racism. Well, institutional racism, according to one definition, is having policies and procedures that prevent people from making progress. Not just talking in terms of ethnicity, and they don't exist. But do we ensure, or do we help the police to ensure that there aren't any barriers in the way? Perhaps looking at the there's a 3,000 word statement I think needs to be put together, which was mentioned, and sometimes wording can be different. What is understood in one ethnicity, if you like, can be something quite different in another. So ensuring the vigilators, the people who are looking at these, understand those differences is quite important. So yeah, it's ensuring that the playing field is completely level, and we can only do that by investigating, going and talking. There's lots of things we need to look at. We're still very much at the data gathering stage, but what we're not doing is going to come in and look at a little bit of data and say, right, that's it, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to gather in as much as we can, and that's why talking to all levels of the force is so important. Plus doing a control group, because it could be that the promotion process is the same regardless of ethnicity. So what's the control? So we will talk to white officers about their experiences as well. But
so this issue needs to be addressed from different angles. So we mentioned optics a moment ago, the numbers, perception. There are these soft issues that don't always see the light of day, and yet that needs to be addressed in some way itself as well, I would suspect.
yes, I mean, I think there's far more recognition now of people as individuals, and it's the job, the role, rather than the person's skin. But there are sensibilities that need to be accounted for as well. For example, if you go into a person's house of a particular faith, then you need to be aware of the cultural side, what's important there, which is, you know, taking shoes off. You're going to walk in your size 14 boots, I don't know what you guys wear now. But that's important, being able to talk to women as well. You know, we've heard this mentioned in the interviews. It's important that there is a woman police officer available to talk to the woman, so it doesn't go through the man's. Lots of cultural things that need to be understood, and training may yet be an issue. We've got some suggestions, some training needs to be put back in place. It did exist in the past and perhaps needs to be revisited. Same as learning on the job. You know, you can learn so much on the job, but you still need to know how to write statements. That was another piece that came up, which is very interesting. But I don't want to prejudge and come up with conclusions before we've looked at everything.
But you've touched on a topic that if we could get your thoughts on right now, when you refer to the sensitivities in certain cultures, and this is probably an oxymoron if I ask what crimes are underreported. Well, how would you know if they're not reported? But do you get a sense that there are certain, and you mentioned earlier, whether it's due to COVID or otherwise, that there seems to be an increase in certain so-called crimes. Do you sense that there is an area, whether it be a community or certain crimes, that are underreported for whatever reason?
No, that's a good question. And there's probably two main areas. Fraud is probably underreported, but it's not necessarily something I want to talk about today. Understanding that if you're a victim of fraud, it's equally as stressful. The other area is hate crime, which I think is more, which like to talk a little bit about now, because we see. We think that is underreported alongside domestic abuse. Although with our stats around domestic abuse, we've seen that increase in domestic abuse by about 10% over the last year, which we think is, in one way, I say a good thing. Of course, it's a good thing in terms of more people are confident in coming forward to report the crime. But at some point, we've got to say, well, we can't keep saying it's a good thing if it keeps increasing. With hate crime, often it's the case that people won't report to us because they may have had bad experiences with the police. So whether that's, for example, homophobic, rape, or transgender or race-related hate crime, or disability-related hate crime. So some of those communities will be less willing to come forward and tell us of their experiences because of how they've been treated in the past. And for some of those, they've got very long memories, or it's passed down from generation to generation. So hate crime is an area that we are constantly working on. We have Hate Crime Awareness Week. We have hate crime officers. Hearts Against Hate is a website that you can report into, so you don't have to come into a police station or call into the police control room. And we have a number of third-party reporting centres where people in those organisations have had some training, and then if someone comes to them because they don't want to speak directly to the police, then that's what they can do. So again, these are efforts that we're making to reach out to communities to say, look, tell us what's going on, because if you don't, it's not much our ability to deal with that is restricted.
And officers can be subject to hate crime as well.
And it's a good point, Chris, and we're seeing more of that, particularly, sorry to interrupt you, but we've seen some officers that have been abused because of their sexuality, and some abused because of their ethnic origin. And it's shocking. And we will, and we've just recently done a big piece of work on this. Yeah. We will prosecute people for that, because this is, people say about, you have to take a certain amount as a police officer, and they talk about, well, it's directed at the uniform, not the individual. But in some of these circumstances around sexuality or race, that is directed at the individual, and we won't stand for it.
No,
sorry
absolutely.
to cut across.
No, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. There had been this piece of work around it, and a press release went out exactly along those lines, and detailing some of the experiences that officers had just in the normal course of walking down a high street somewhere. And no, totally unacceptable. So.
Just on this topic and what can be done about it, and I appreciate you're addressing it from different angles. Do you also spend time with places of worship, with different communities and different faith groups, to share with them your work and try and create by that means the trust and the confidence that sometimes is lacking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I spoke briefly about my initial policing career, where I started in Southall, and within a week of landing, I was in a Gurdwara, enjoying the food.
Yes.
And I've spent many days, and it's not just me. We encourage our officers to learn and understand. But I've spent many days in mosques, particularly the one over in St Albans. I did almost a magical mystery tour of all our synagogues a few months ago with one of our Jewish officers, and it's one of those things that I think in life, one of the things that I learned, and I did a bit of philosophy at university, not a great deal, but a bit, and I think it was Descartes, the French philosopher, that said about just being more informed through life, and that's always impacted on me, and I've always tried to be more informed through learning about other people, other cultures, trying to read more extensively. But I think what can we do about it? A colleague described this to me as otherhood. In life, otherhood, whether it's a different religion or a different country or something just different to what you're used to can often feel quite concerning to you, because it's outside of your comfort zone. But actually, the vast majority of the time, you reach out and try and understand and engage. That otherhood is then not so much of an issue, and I think it's a societal challenge, isn't it? I mean, I like to think that we live in a very multicultural country where we are not just tolerant but accepting. And unfortunately, I think with that's one of the flip sides to social media. It can be a great, it can be a fantastic tool, can't it? But also, it can spread misinformation. It can spread hatred, and so we've all got a role to play. Sorry, I feel like I've gone on a bit of a one there.
I was going to say, I think understanding different faiths is very important. A few months ago, we had an Islam Study Day in Poddesbar, one at the local Methodist church, is run by a guy called Dr. Chris Hewer, who is an absolute expert in the area. He's been on Al Jazeera and presented programmes, and it was fascinating. Sad there weren't more people there who go along and understand and want to know what it's about, because there is an awful lot of misinformation about this whole issue of jihad and the like. Is people have got ideas in their head, and the more we understand, the more we read, the better we become. There's always going to be a minority. You'll never ever, they are programmed in a particular way, and hate is their default setting, and it's not going to change. But no, the more people understand that the police are there for the community, the better. And that's all parts.
For the whole community.
The whole community.
Yes.
Whole community.
As opposed to,
no fear or favour. And it was mentioned the other day again by one of the officers I was chatting to. He said this guy had been throwing abuse at him and having a go. The next week he's called to the guy's mother's house because there's been a break-in. And he said, well, I don't have a choice. I've still got to come and help you because that's my role, even though you were trying to.
And just before I come to you, Enoch, may I mention, it may well be that certain communities haven't had the best of experiences based on their previous experience, and not only within the UK, but in other countries. And as a result of that experience, they bring that experience to the UK, and as a result, they connect police forces, and that may colour their.
Think of Logan. He joined the police, and his father had been beaten up by a couple of rogue officers, Hackney or somewhere around that sort of area, and he had to break it to his father that he was joining the police force. His father was in the hospital. The case got won in the end, and it all got sorted out. But yes, historically, they may think back to the 70s or the 80s, an experience that affects the enthusiasm for going into it. And in time, we're going to be looking at the traveller community, because they want to, as they settle down more and more, become more educated. And I talk to travellers, some great people out there. I think the chairperson has a degree of sort. But as they settle down, they will feel, I'm going to join the police. So we're going to have to look at that side of things as well. I know we're going a bit off topic, but it is almost, if you look back to the 50s, with black officers joining the police, and then we go through. So hopefully we take those learnings away with us.
Just an observation on this same topic. I think you just started talking about, we all agree that immigration is going high and it's not going to stop. It's going to go higher and higher. You can see that, current Afghanistan families coming in, and the things happening in Ukraine.
And Hong Kong as well.
Yes, and my thinking while you were discussing is, very similar to what Spike said. People who migrate to this country, they have got this fear of police and the community, and also the uniform fear as well. And some of the communities, if they have connections with police or visited by the police, they can even stop their in-laws getting, marriage can be stopped, and and they have got that fear of police, and I'm sure that we say police are friends. Yes, correct.
Yes.
So how can, you may, some police officers make, because, some of the communities are really polite talking to the police or everything. Some of the police may take advantage of that or, probably encourage, the politeness, easy to reach out and all this. It's something, how we can reach out that, we are friends. We are here to support you in, but then we've got a job to do, certain things, it's not every person we deal with, you're going to put behind the bars or something.
Well, I think it's a great point, and it just highlights what is the complexity of policing. So whether it's, as we talked about earlier, traditional type crimes of burglary or shoplifting or theft from motor vehicle, through to more complex hidden crimes like modern day human trafficking or child sexual exploitation, or whether it be using cyber to do fraud, and then you overlay that with a globalized world that impacts in terms of displaced communities through war and conflict, and how that then impacts on first of all communities, but also on how we police those communities. So we have a number of Afghan hotels in Hertfordshire. We have sadly the county council is dealing with a large number of unaccompanied minors. These are a lot of these things that take up a lot of resource, a lot of time, and have got a tragic story attached to them, will not even be picked up by the public because they might just be worried about the bit of antisocial behaviour that is happening in their street, which is still important to them, but there's all these other really difficult things going on. In relation to then the cultures that those individual asylum seekers or refugees come with, will be through their own frames of reference, won't they, in terms of what they're faced with. So I remember going back to my days policing Southall, the Somalian community that arrived there had come from a chaotic, war-torn country, and so their norms, their social norms, were very different to what is a strong, democratic, relatively wealthy country coming in, and that created actually a lot of tension between the Somalian community and the Sikh community at the time. So I think your point is very well made, Enoch. That actually we ask a lot, particularly of police officers, in terms, because we are largely both the provider of first and last resort in terms of policing and keeping people safe, but understanding all of these other complexities. And I say to officers now, actually, the war that is going on in Ukraine, how is that going to impact? How is that going to impact on policing in Hertfordshire? Because it will. There will be an impact. There is a vigil going on in Broxbourne today around the war, right? So that is a manifestation of something that's going on elsewhere that is happening on our streets, and I think it comes back to people needing to be more informed, certainly more tolerant. Arguably beyond tolerant into accepting, but that journey also, we need help. We need help to understand those communities, because if you take something like female genital mutilation, which is a criminal offence in this country, in certain communities, that they don't see it through that lens. And so these are real cultural and challenges that we face as we navigate our way through it. So the more that we can reach out through organisations like your own, One Vision, take on board critical friends, other people, because ultimately every time a police officer puts their uniform away and goes home, that they're part of the community as well, and they're a human.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you haven't even touched on mental health, which is a
Well,
huge
don't
issue.
get me going on that, Chris.
Well, no, but I know from talking to police when we went round Boreham Wood, one of the officers said there, 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, we become the mental health support service. And much of the issues that we see on the use of force panel are directly related to mental health. The guy walking along on the roof in Hitchin, I think it was, threatening to jump off. it ties up resources, but you can't leave someone just to throw themselves off the roof. You've got to have those skills to be able to talk them down and coordinate and the like. And I see a lot of criminality is linked to mental health, and certainly ASB as well.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we'll just touch on it briefly, is that you're absolutely right. Service provision around mental health is, in my humble opinion, not where it needs to be. There are many people in crises, and we see it through different ages, both genders. So you often see young teenage girls often having, in certain circumstances, suicidal thoughts around images and so on, and then men between the ages of 40 and 50 more likely to commit suicide because of where they are on their life journey. So you've got all of these challenges around mental health, which requires time and resource to help people, and often is the case with the right help and the right support at the right time. A lot of those individuals will get through it, but it manifests itself with people walking out into the road, trying to jump off car park buildings, self-harming,
Motorway bridges,
and we will so sometimes the public might hear that we've tasered someone, but we've tasered them because they've got a knife to their throat, and what we're trying to do under Human Rights Act, right to life. We've got a positive duty to intervene. And so sometimes people think, God, they're turning up with, firearms and tasers and baton guns and stuff. But we're trying to use an intervention that will still save that person's life. These are just some of the complexities that we work around. But mental health, and if there could be more mental health service provision, and if any of my colleagues in health are listening to this, because they hear me talk about it all the time, because they know, I mean, the health service has been under immense pressure, isn't it? And fair play, they've got us through a really challenging time. But we as a communities need to start thinking about where should we be putting our tax money to help and support people if we want a brighter future.
Yes.
But you see some of the comments, and I talked about motorway bridges. There's been a couple of instances over the M25, and some of the comments just disgusting. Yeah, well, just jump. Give them a push or whatever. This is a civilized society here. Yeah, you've been inconvenienced, but what about the person who's up there? What about their family? I have a very, very good friend who committed suicide, sadly, many years ago. And it's often the people who are left behind who suffer from it. It's dreadful.
There will be another time when we will carry on this conversation, and there's so much more still to. I hope you're still okay with time, and if you're not, please let us know. But just one word on that last point: selfishness. There is a lot of that in the world, not to mention in our own community, and there seems to be a focus based on our just a few comments we've now made. There seems to be a focus on what separates us and what are the differences, as opposed to where the similarities lie, and what have we actually got in common. And yes, education is crucial, but I guess there needs to be more interaction. We need to come together, because without that dialogue, we won't be able to discover one another's pet hates and loves and whatever it may be, whether it's sport or food, etc. But we touched on already. We've touched on children, young people, sexual exploitation, criminal behaviour. How does that connect into the county lines, if at all?
I mean, yes. Criminal exploitation and to a certain degree, sexual exploitation does link into county lines, but it's more around the criminal exploitation where broadly large urban gangs, drug dealers will reach out into areas beyond the urban, into counties, hence the term county lines, and lines being the phone lines, the dedicated phone lines that they use to sell and distribute their drugs. But they will seek to try and avoid any kind of detection by using vulnerable people. So maybe school children, people with potentially learning difficulties, vulnerable people, to do their work, and they will advise them to say, well, if you're stopped by the police and you're carrying a load of drugs, you know, to say, well, you were forced into it, and you know, and in certain circumstances, not in all circumstances, because we'll do a proper and thorough investigation and be professionally curious, is actually with some of those individuals that are moving those drugs around, they are actually victims themselves because they've been coerced into this, and this is probably another moment, you know, that why do we have so many issues with drugs? Because there are people that take drugs, so there will always be a demand to a certain degree for drugs. Chris touched on other countries doing things. I'm not going to get into
New York,
what you know, legalization or not, or decriminalization or any of that. But what we do see is that lives are still being ruined through these county lines, and often they then manifest themselves in turf wars, where people are trying to take over or control them, and that's where you'll see violence sadly often play out on the streets. What I will say though is that we have Operation Mantis, which is a dedicated unit specifically to building the intelligence and enforcement around county lines, and through our serious and organised crime group network, and our regional network and National Crime Agency as well, you know, alongside the From Harm to Hope government 10-year strategy around drugs, you know, we are making inroads, but the reality is that I've always said this: we've got to try and reduce the demand. So bringing drug treatment, partnership work, CGL, Change, Grow, Live, the charity that we work closely with in Hertfordshire and others, they have a massive role to play. But often is the case, and it comes back to what you were touching on earlier about selfishness, is a lot of people won't see that as money well spent to try and pull people out of those difficult places, often because they've been subjected to it from a young age, or that there's a history of it in a family. But actually investing money there will stop quite a lot of the manifestation of violence on the streets.
Absolutely.
What do you observe during your time with the police when it comes to county lines and or the young people and any exploitation that you've noticed?
I've not been involved in looking at county lines with the police, but obviously looking at it as an observer and being interested in what's going on. It's money. It's putting money into treatment, into prevention, the usual story. It's looking at inequalities, it's looking at poverty, it's looking at coercion, it's looking at a whole range of things. And these are difficult. They're in the difficult pile. Many people out there just say, well, stick them in prison. That's the answer. I think nowadays, even parking offence, stick them in prison. I say it seems to be a lack of tolerance. And interesting, you used the word tolerance a few times, because tolerance can be interpreted in two different ways, which is quite interesting. We won't go down the semantics route. But no, the whole mental health, getting proper support for young people, which isn't available out there. A little bit about that through schools and the like, but trying to get youngsters with suicidal tendencies to get referred to a psychiatrist is incredibly difficult. It almost seemed to be, well, until you're actually at that stage of committing suicide, sorry, we can't do anything. How do we get the resources into that? And again, it comes back to austerity. You know, we know the damage that was done, which covers over into other areas as well. But we need to listen to people like Chris Dawes, who understand from being a barrister himself, thinking about crime, thinking about prevention and interventions and the like. And we're going to have to spend the money on it. You know, there's no alternative.
Yes, indeed. Talking about spending money, stop and search. There seems to be, when it does happen, it's sometimes known to go wrong and explodes, and the media gets hold of it, etc. What do you find? The statistics seem to show that there are a lot of stop and searches that go on, but the actual when it comes to actually going through, a lot of people are, after that, are let go. Only a few, I say a few, they're charged. Correct me if I'm wrong, between July and December of last year, if you look at it on a monthly basis, there was somewhere between 400 and 600 that were actually stopped on a monthly basis, but only somewhere between 100 and 200 were actually charged. What is your thinking there, whether it be on the numbers or the need for it, and how to actually address that with the community? Because there seems to be some concern by certain members of the community that it's actually focusing on one group only.
So, this is, for me, so I'm obviously looking at this through the lens of a police officer, and I see stop and search as a powerful tool to prevent harm in communities and to keep people safe. I think one of our biggest challenges with stop and search is it's not the what, it's the how. How we go about doing it, how we treat people with dignity and respect, even when we are speaking to them and searching them. And I think that's a really important point for our officers to understand. There is, you're right, of course. We don't have a crystal ball and know exactly who might be carrying a knife or drugs or stolen property at any one time. If we did, we'd have a 100% success rate. So we have to use what we call reasonable suspicion based on different factors, whether it's, for example, whether you're patrolling a high crime area that may have suffered from specific burglaries over a period of time, and the description of the burglars were of a certain age, maybe clothing, that kind of thing. So our stop and search will be very much, where we can, completely intelligence led, and of course it comes back to trust and confidence in communities, because if communities are telling us stuff, we can factor that in. And of course, actually, quite a lot of our stop and searches will come about from a call from the public. I've just seen somebody leaving my neighbour's house. They're away on holiday. I think, what were they wearing? And of course, if it's something really distinctive, that narrows it down. But if it's blue jeans, black coat, and you've got a number of people in that area that've got blue jeans and black coat, well, I think the public would still expect us to be professionally curious and do our job to try and identify that individual. So we monitor really, really closely our stop and search figures. We look at the, for want of a better term, conversion rate from, if I've stopped and searched someone, has it led to what we would call a positive outcome? So has it led to an arrest, or has it led to identifying contraband? Because we wouldn't always arrest if we've just found, for example, some cannabis. The different circumstances might dictate. So we look at those, and broadly, I think we're somewhere in the region of about a 20% hit rate. So one in every 5 stop and search will lead to some kind of positive outcome, give or take. I mean, it varies, and we have stop and search scrutiny panels with members of the public, lay visitors, that will look at those stop and searches that have been undertaken. I've actually said that in certain circumstances we should have more stop and search, because actually when I look at the number of officers we have, so you say there's certainly when I last looked at this, I seem to remember saying that out of our number of frontline officers, the number of stop and searches we were getting a month was less than probably 1 stop and search per officer per month. And of course, some on our proactive units will be doing more of that. So for a lot of officers, they're probably not doing much at all. So for some people, they might take some comfort in that, in terms of, that actually we're not, every time cops are out there, we're not, using this indiscriminately. We are using it as a targeted tool, because if we didn't use it, arguably that 20% of positive outcome, that wouldn't be captured. So in that, there are knives, there is stolen property, there is drugs. So yes, we've always got to make sure that we are, as best as we can be, intelligence-led. That largely involves community intelligence. And we've got to recognise the sensitivities around the use of it. But I come back to the point where I started. Often it's it's not the what, it's the how. But Chris has been looking at this.
I'll give a civilian take on this. I get concerned where I hear of an individual saying they've been stopped 17 times. Okay, so first of all, how do we deal with that? I am a firm advocate of ID cards. I think ID cards will make a huge difference. I think it's a major mistake that we didn't go down that route in the first place, because if you get to a stop situation and you hand over an ID card, shows who you are, it's a quick check. Oh, you're a barrister, sir. Away you go. It's clearly that's not going to be a person of any sort of interest at all.
Well, not all barristers are necessary. Well, anyway,
Professionals have been stopped because of what they're wearing. It's a bit like going into court. The barrister turns up in jeans and the guy at the front says, "Sorry, defendant's that way," sort of thing. So it's like, but yes, there are people being stopped far too often, so there's something wrong there. Then leads into an interesting case, that one recently where the lecturer was trying to hand out a card to someone who was stopped to explain what their rights were. She then got arrested and ended up being strip searched and everything, simply because she wouldn't say who she was. She didn't declare that. So that's an issue. I think if people don't comply with a lawful police instruction, then there have to be issues. Okay, so what were the criminals like? I think the criminals would love stop and search to be ended, because like we see on the motorways where there are spot checks, how many vehicles are uninsured, MOT, unsafe, people out with warrants against them, offensive weapons. I'd like to see far more of that happen. But yes, it has to be intelligence-led, and it has to be, it's no good evening up the numbers saying, okay, well, we're doing an equal number of blacks and whites, just to use it, or Martians and Venusians, however you like to. That's not going to work, because that's a complete and utter waste of resource. From an economic point of view, I don't want the police wasting time doing stop and searches if the return is not good. But yes, it is a powerful tool in that armoury, and it is down to how it is handled. Again, I guess most of the stops are vehicles in Hertfordshire, whereas they'll be on public networks, transport networks and in other areas. But very, very difficult.
But what seems to not be very clear or very evident is that it is intelligence-led. That seems to be lost in the in this discussion. More often than not, you only get the numbers, or as you say, 17 times. But that intelligence-led aspect doesn't seem to get a lot of airplay.
No, it doesn't, and of course some of it is because some of our intelligence is
needs to be kept under wraps for obvious reasons, because some of that will come from covert human intelligence sources, informants in other money. But it's a really challenging area, because and I've talked about this a lot, and Chris touched about targeting limited resources. So we know that generally, as a proportion of society, men commit far more crime than women. We also know that it's younger men that commit far more crime than anyone else, right? So you start focusing down, right? You start going beyond that. This is where controversy really starts kicking, because generally people say, well, why wouldn't you focus on young men? Because that's where the majority of crime takes place. It's when you start getting into these other areas of stop and search, it becomes more controversial, because society generally has to start looking at itself and start understanding, what are those motivations for crime? is there a greater propensity for crime in certain sections of certain communities, and start asking those really difficult questions, because ultimately, we're here to try and keep people safe, and we have to target those resources. Isn't it? I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's very limited. There's no real reason for us to go out and stop, 80-year-old women on suspicion of perhaps burglary.
Yeah.
Now, accepting there might be 1 or 2 80-year-old women that are out shoplifting,
Yep.
and again, there'll be reasons behind that. But I'm trying to make the point, and this is where it becomes very challenging, and this is where we need to feel safe to have those conversations and discussions, because for me, disproportionality is not the problem. It will be discrimination is the problem. If we've got officers that are out specifically discriminating against certain individuals with no basis, that's a problem. But actually disproportionate, because I've already said we're disproportionate, because we stop more men than we do women, and we stop more younger people than we do older people.
Yeah.
So for me, it's very much about, we've got to make sure that we're not discriminating, but we perhaps, as a mature conversation, need to think more about what disproportionality means. And I'm not going to go beyond that point at this stage.
If you talk about knife crime, I mean, when there was an emphasis on knife crime in London, it was the question of the men giving the blades to the women to put in their bags, because on the basis of they get stopped to search, they haven't got a knife, the girlfriend's been forced to carry it, or of course they've been hidden somewhere ready to be picked up in a park or whatever. It's without it, I think society is going to be at risk. But it again, that's everything. It's tied up with other areas. It's the severity of the possible offence which is being covered as well.
And as you rightly point out, we're nearly up with our time. But as you just say there, it's all tied up. I'm getting the impression that there are so many things linked in to each other, and that holistic policing, I don't know if that is such a term or if it exists, but if there is such a thing as holistic policing, well, how do you see policing in the next decade?
First of all, I would say that we've got some challenges ahead. If you look at income inequality, deprivation, conflict in a globalized society, all those things will bring with it some huge challenges, alongside some real big ticket items, like, for example, climate change and how that's bringing about protest. You talk about income inequality, but you also talk about racial inequality or other inequalities. So we've got a whole load of stuff going on there. I'll avoid that, but yeah. So there's lots of challenges for society. So we're just focusing in on policing. Well, we police the society that comes about. So in Hertfordshire, we're really focusing in on a prevention first approach. So I talked about more money to put into schools early on. So early intervention, because adverse childhood experiences. If you get into those adverse childhood experiences early doors, and putting in sufficient resources, you can turn people's lives around, and that's money well spent. But also, because we're going to have more diverse communities, we need to spend more time educating people, talking about people, breaking down that otherhood that I spoke about earlier, so that we have harmonious communities, because actually harmonious communities that feel well served by public sector and they will police themselves better as well, because ultimately put it out there, a society without police is either going to be a really beautiful place because everyone's bought into it, or it's going to be a really, really chaotic place, because what and what strikes me both as an individual and as a cop is when you see some people that really are, dare I say it, nasty, evil criminals that engage in criminality, make other people's lives a misery. When it's them that is being attacked, who are they calling?
Yes.
Yeah? They're calling us, the people that they loathe,
Yeah.
to come and help and try and safeguard them.
Yes.
So I drifted slightly off the point, but so for me, the challenges will be all of those things that I mentioned. But in order to address that with limited resources, we've got to collectively get upstream and help people, because I think it was the late Desmond Tutu that said, at some point we've got to realise why we keep pulling people out of the river.
Yes.
While
they're jumping in the first
and move further upstream and stop them jumping in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's always struck me as I've probably got the quote and the person completely wrong, but you get the principle.
You're right.
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah.
It is about that. Yes, not deal with what's happening here, but look at the root causes of why it's got to the situation. No, you're absolutely right. I'd like to see a more intelligent community. I'd like to see people thinking. Well, I don't want to see people thinking. That example I gave you just now about
interacting.
a speed trap in the village. A speed trap in the village is there because people are speeding through it. Don't go and tell people to slow down because they're going to get caught. Let them get caught, and then they'll learn the lesson from it. So working with the police, I say, being more intelligent, thinking things through. Just because somebody's got 3 years, it's not the police's fault. That's the judiciary. Who runs the judiciary? It comes out of the Home Office, the Justice Minister, the sentencing guidelines that the judges are given. Understand how it all works. Don't go and blame the police because of that sentence. Don't blame the police because they haven't caught the person who's broken into your van because you left the tools in there overnight, despite being told with all the operations, chariot and things like that, do not leave valuables in your van. If you must, put them in the slam box, etc., etc. A number of times I see people whining because they've been broken into because they haven't had basic crime prevention at the forefront, stopping it. Same with illegal parking. If the police got to come out and deal with somebody who's parked illegally, that's taken them away from another job, which may not be catching real criminals, as people like to say, but it could be an education. It could be going into a school or working with a youngster. A lot of people are where they are because they made the right choices along the road. Most of us, I think, have had times when we could have taken the wrong path. We could have done something really stupid. Perhaps we have. But, the way things have worked out, we've actually ended up on the straight and narrow. And that's not always the case. So people will go down the wrong route. And it might be, rather than charging them, it's taking them into the back room, having a chat about it, spending some time. So, look, this is how you could end up. If you carry on this path, you're going to end up in front of this magistrate. When you get to 18, you're going to end up in front of a judge and prison and things like that, and helping people to understand. But it takes time and it takes money. But money. For many people, no, just bang them up or string them up or whatever. So
if only that were the answer, it would be fairly straightforward, to say the least. Time is up. Enoch is going to conclude, unless, gentlemen, you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share with us.
Well, all I was just going to say was,
First of all, big thanks to Chris. And some people watching it might think, this Matt Nicholls guy's just brought a mate along, to take some of the heat. But Chris genuinely is a critical friend, and that's important. So he's used his own experiences, but also what he is involved in terms of trying to make the policing more accountable. So thanks to Chris, but thanks to both of you, not just for inviting us along today to talk about some challenging issues, but it's also to thank you both for the work that you do with One Vision, because it's a charitable organisation that's out there trying to bring communities together. I was humbled by walking in earlier and seeing Enoch's family and other volunteers packing up food bags to give out to people that are in food poverty, and that really touches me as well, because we talked about it earlier. We live in one of the richest countries in the world, but there are still people out there that need help and support, and the more that we can go out and help and support and volunteer, That would be great. So thank you, guys. But I'm going to cede to you and Enoch.
Thank you to both of you. I hope we can do this again. Enoch.
I just want to make a couple of requests, how much you can influence on our requests. One of our arms is One Voice, bringing different communities together. We've been working so hard for the last 2 years. There are some communities that are tucked, within them, so we bring out, and we integrate with other communities. We want to celebrate with police, some of the celebrations coming up, like for example Diwali or Eid, or we want to bring all these communities together, and we want to celebrate with you. We're going to be hosting the Asian Women Conference.
Mm-hmm.
So we believe that majority of Asian women, their active life stops after their marriage or having children, and they're not very active. So we are working with some health professionals, and we want to include this, how we can work together within the community. That's one request. The other request I want to make is, may not be possible, or it may be, your station office, we'll take an example of Watford. People visit, that's supposed to be a customer service area, people visit, whatever the reason is. And Watford is a diverse community, I do know that, your DCs or DIs or ununiformed, they're not uniformed police, they go out and, from your station office, to reflect the community, even one day, a week or month, why can't your station officers wear their, if they are Asian women, they can wear their traditional dress, making more welcoming, people can know that, I can go, I feel home, whether it's an African origin, or they got a beautiful dress and they can work in the station office. Even a Bollywood theme, music can play, and it's not all criminals always come to this.
No, it's a good point, and I think, bearing in mind we are in Watford, so the police station in Shady Lane, by the end of this year will be no more. We're moving to more central Watford.
Yes.
So there is an opportunity here for. We're certainly looking at ways of making the police stations that we do have that are operational and open to the public more friendly, and we're looking at digitising them more as well. But I think that's a really interesting point around your traditional dress and I suppose getting the more human side out. Mm-hmm. So what I would say there is we'll have a new chief inspector at Watford. She's Diane Whiteside, who's coming from West Yorkshire. She's taken over from Ian Grout. So there's an opportunity there to link in with her. Ian will be doing the rounds anyway, introducing her to various stakeholders and Peter, the local mayor, and so on. But there's an opportunity to speak around that for sure. And what I would say is where we can support community-based events, we will. That's not always possible at chief officer level, although we do our level best to get around. But of course, you've got your local chief inspectors that look after districts, but you mentioned inspectors. We've got senior representation, but also let's not forget that it's those frontline workers that are day and night out there, and they should be and are our role models in the community. So yes, we will always look to work in ethical partnerships and assist with community events. So yeah, please continue to reach out.
Brilliant. Have we stopped recording, by the way?
No, we all.
Okay, that's fine. What I was going to say is the what we used to call town hall events at Ford when I was there, I think are valuable. I know there's mixed turnouts, but the one that we had that must be 5 years ago when Steve addressed the local people was invaluable. I think anything like that could be really useful. But appreciating it is time intensive, but to explain to the community what is going on, why you can't do this, why you're not seeing this, and what else might be might be happening.
Well,
I think it's illuminating.
yeah, and I had an event not too dissimilar to that in a barn in East Herts earlier with the rural community. You know, with so it's a similar sort of thing because of course 70% of Hertfordshire is rural. So. And of course, I suppose town halls might upset some of the rural community. So barn halls and town halls, but yes, no, absolutely.
It's what we used to call town halls.
Yeah, no, I get it. So sorry, Enoch, we're stealing your thunder.
I just want to say thank you, gentlemen. I know how busy you are, and one of the reasons you came here and you want to talk about all the issues because you love your community.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that the people, the community watching, that police are our true friends.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And I wanted, in 2023, all these difficult things, we're coming out of COVID and all things are happening, and it is our opportunities to work with the police and to, both the safer side and also, they are human too.
Yes.
So we can work together. And thank you so much for coming.
It isn't all line of duty.
Yes. Thank you so much. And we will be in Connected and One Vision, bringing communities together, and you're part of our community as well.
Indeed.
So we will work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.